and welcome to the lineup. Today is February the 3rd, 2022. I'm Barry Stagner. And first of all, I wanted to thank all of you who have been praying for us or who have attended and participated in the Proximity Conference. We had a wonderful weekend out of Calvary Chapel, East Anaheim. Heartfelt thanks to Pastor Bob Copany and the team there, and for welcoming us and having a hand in making things run so smoothly. It was just a phenomenal day. So great to meet many of you and to shake your hand. And I always appreciate the comment that people say, we watch you guys so often, we feel like we know you. And it's a good thing for us to get to see your face and know you as well. So thanks for your support and prayers in that. We had kind of an interesting thing happen today as we jump into our stories. And many of you have probably heard that U.S. Central Command raised the Defense Condition Readiness status, or our DEFCON status, to level 3 today. And there's multiple reasons for that. But I thought it'd be a point of interest for all of us just to maybe understand exactly what that means. There are 5 levels to our defense readiness condition, according to the U.S. ranking or readiness system. They are DEFCON 1, which is just simply, it's called fade out readiness. It's level 1. It's normal readiness. It's the lowest state of readiness. Level 2, or DEFCON 4 rather, is double take. And that stands for above normal readiness, and the operational things that will take place at level 2, which we have been at, as increased intelligence watch, strengthened security measures. And DEFCON 3, which again, Central Command raised us to that level just today, is Air Force is ready to mobilize in 15 minutes. Increase in force readiness above that required for normal readiness. And if you keep moving up the scale, DEFCON 2 is operation or level fast base, I should say. Armed forces ready to deploy and engage in less than 6 hours. And then finally, level 1, DEFCON level 1, cocked pistol is the name of that level. Maximum readiness for immediate response. Nuclear war is imminent or has already started. So this is a big deal to move from level 2 to level 3. And CENTCOM reported that the reason for this is the rocket attacks on U.S. bases and airstrikes carried out by the U.S. military. This paired with the EUCOM level being raised there, and the United States activating, based on the U.S. activating an artillery command in Europe as Russia continues to amass troops near the Ukrainian border, and also the raised level of AFRICOM, Africa's defense level readiness due to an ongoing conflict in Ethiopia. And obviously, wars and rumors of wars would be the banner over this prophetic development, but we are at DEFCON 3 here in the United States, and we are at an operational capacity where our Air Force is ready to fly in 15 minutes and respond to any potential attacks. So big news today, on the global scale, regarding our defense readiness condition. Reuters has reported that the U.S. State Department official says Iran is on pace to have a nuclear bomb or nuclear bomb material in just weeks. Indirect talks between the U.S. and Iran on returning to the 2015 nuclear agreement are entering its final stretch, the article says, as Iran's continuing nuclear program is on pace to produce fuel for a bomb in just a matter of weeks, according to a senior U.S. State Department official. The latest talks in Vienna were among the most intensive that we have had to date on returning to the deal formerly known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which former President Donald Trump pulled out of in 2018, the official said. We made progress narrowing down the list of differences just to the key priorities on all sides, and that's why now is the time for political decisions, the official said, who obviously spoke on the condition of anonymity. U.S. President Biden came into office a year ago promising to re-enter the deal, but Iran has continued to work on its nuclear program, and a deal has remained elusive. The official said Washington has already laid out what it's prepared to do in terms of lifting sanctions that are inconsistent with the nuclear deal, and that the ball was in Tehran's court. Now is the time for Iran to decide whether it is prepared to make those decisions necessary for mutual return to compliance with the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. They've been continuing to enrich uranium. They bought the advanced centrifuges, which allow them to enrich uranium even quicker, and they're continuing to enrich it. And yet the U.S. still continues to pursue some type of agreement with those who have stated by their actions what their intentions actually are, and that is to have a nuclear device. And of course, we've heard over the years, time and again, their intentions of that nuclear device are to point it at Israel. Their hope, goal, wish in the Iranian administration under the supreme leader, the Ayatollah Khamenei, is to destroy the great Satan, which is the United States, and this little Satan, which of course is Israel, by the way, the only democracy in the Middle East. And again, here we have, one of the things we've talked about multiple times in the past, that when you've got an indecisive administration, and one that is presented, especially to Middle East players, as being weak, they're certainly going to exploit and take advantage of that, because this is a region that understands only strength and expressions of it. And that's why Israel has been so aggressive in their response to the presence of the Iranian forces in Syria on their northern border, and other elements that we've seen in the past that's seeking to stave off the development of a nuclear weapon coming from the Iranians. Israel 365 says Israel holds secret massive attack drills against Iran with U.S. participation. A U.S. official participated in a classified Israeli Air Force exercise simulating a massive attack on the Iranian nuclear facility, reports the Times of Israel. The drill took place 2 weeks ago, according to the report, and a United States Air Force officer took part in the exercise in the role of an observer. Israel's Khan public broadcaster reported the drill involved dozens of Air Force jets and included several scenarios, among them long-range strikes, mid-air refueling, and responses against anti-aircraft weaponry. The unconventional participation of an American official was portrayed by the report as proof of a shift in Washington's view of Iran's nuclear program, as negotiations for a new deal seem to be failing. A U.S. State Department official told reporters on Monday that the window of opportunity for obtaining a possible nuclear deal with the Islamic Republic was closing. And yet, as our first article said, we keep pursuing it. Iran's nuclear program is advancing. A deal will become irrelevant in a few weeks, he said, adding that it was made clear both to Iran and other participants in the negotiations in Vienna. Israel, which is most opposed to the talks, expressed that it reserves the right to launch military action to defend its citizens regardless of the outcome in Vienna. And Prime Minister Naftali Bennett said Tuesday that the campaign to weaken Iran would be fought on several fronts, and he added that preparations need to be made for a world that does not just have one police officer and realizes that the U.S. is focused on Russia and China. That's the reality, he said. So this is all going somewhere prophetically, and we're going to have a story that ties this all together here in a couple of minutes. But it's interesting to see these types of things taking place. Pardon me, Siri's trying to get in on the program here. Sorry about that. But interesting to see these things in particular develop as the Iranians continue to enrich uranium to a weapons grade. And as we've talked about before, energy level enrichment, which is what they claim to do, is for peaceful and energy related purposes, only is 20%. And what's the point in enriching beyond that? Because it costs money, a significant amount of money, to continue to enrich uranium, and the cost of the centrifuges and all the other things associated with it, to say nothing of building the facilities and procuring the uranium to separate the U-238 from the U-235 and get the fissile material necessary for a weapons-grade uranium. It's just pointless to do so beyond 20%. And yet, the world still wants to sit down, and the U.S. in the lead, with the Iranians, the Iranian government, I should say, not the people, the Iranian government at the negotiating table. Interesting that the All Arab News has reported just yesterday that Anthony Blinken, tells Abbas the U.S. is committed to a two-state solution and the reopening of a Palestinian Jerusalem consulate. U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, the article says, spoke on Monday with Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, with Israeli Foreign Minister Yair Lapid, I should say, not with. According to the U.S. State Department, Blinken made the rare phone call to Abbas as part of efforts to prioritize re-engagement with the Palestinian people and the Palestinian Authority, and discuss the need to improve quality of life for the Palestinian people in tangible ways. Blinken reaffirmed Washington's commitment to the two-state solution and emphasized the need for reform within the Palestinian Authority. Israelis and Palestinians alike deserve to live with equal measures of security, freedom, prosperity, cruciality, and dignity, Blinken told Abbas. Crucially, and dignity, Blinken said. I'm not sure what he means by crucially, but anyway, the PA's official news agency, WAFA, published a recap of the conversation, which implies that the U.S. is still committed to reopening the Jerusalem consulate for the Palestinians. However, State Department spokesman Ned Price declined to comment in a press briefing whether the call between the two even covered the matter. Now, again, we've talked about this many times before. We've talked about it at the conference, I believe, even this past weekend, that, Zechariah chapter 12 says all nations are going to gather together against Jerusalem, and Jerusalem will become a burdensome stone to all nations. And the U.S. is going to be one of those nations that eventually sides with the rest of the world and sees Israel to be the problematic cause of the lack of peace in the Middle East. And again, I think, for us as Christians, it's sad to see the movements like Christ at the Checkpoint, which is basically siding against Israel, and those who are kind of leading the charge in this and claiming, that the Israelis are committing apartheid, as, we're going to talk about this here in a few moments. But, it's amazing to see such ignorance, historical ignorance, that is dominating the newspaper headlines and stories around the world, and certainly the actions of people in political places of power, when Israel has clearly had a physical presence there for some 3,500 years in the past, and even throughout that diaspora, there were Jews that were living in the region throughout that period of time. As a matter of fact, if you look at newspapers around the turn of the 20th century, you will see, or 19th century into the 20th, you will see newspaper reports referring to Jews as Palestinians. And yes, in 132 or 136 A.D., the Roman Empire decided, Hadrian, the Roman emperor, decided that he'd had enough of the Jews. He forbid two Jews to walk together, forbade the use of the word Jew, renamed the area to the ancient enemies of Israel, Palestina, which is the Latinized form of Philistine. And by the way, Philistine means either invaders or immigrants. So if you want to know who the invaders are and the immigrants are, their name tells it all. But, this is a region that God has apportioned off to the nation of Israel, given specific geographic markers in the book of Genesis as to where their dwelling place is going to be. And Israelis are not occupiers, and they aren't committing apartheid. They have the right to the land. It's their land. It's been their land for, as I said, 3.5 millennia. And God has promised in Ezekiel 37 to bring them back into the land, and that the land would bloom like a rose once again, though it was swampland and desert. So we're seeing the Bible be fulfilled, and we're seeing, sadly, the U.S. taking a position that is not what God has ordained for the nation of Israel. God is not behind a two-state solution. The people, the modern-day people known as the Palestinians, are simply Arabs. And you'll find many, many Muslim scholars who have rebuked the Palestinians in past, saying, you know what, you need to let go of this claim that you have a right to the land, because even the Quran says it's given to the land of Israel, has been given to the people of Moses. And they have every right to occupy that land or live in that land. Occupy is not a good choice of words there. But, I've read multiple Muslim scholars who have said the Palestinians are nothing more than Syrian Arabs. And they're just Arabs. They're not a distinct people group. They have no history. They have no authors. They have no coinage. They have no form of archaeology. There's nothing that predates them in an association with the land prior to in 1967, the use of the term being associated with the refugees there. And, we also have to remember, some of this talk about the treatment of the Palestinian people. The Arab peoples there moved away from the Israeli homes because they were told by Arab countries to get out of there because we're going to bomb them off the face of the earth. And then, Yasser Arafat in 67, as I said, started claiming, we are the Palestinians. We are the people with a name and identity associated with the land of Palestine. So, the people in refugee camps who've been there for generations now are there by choice. And they decided, well, we're going to move away from our neighbors because these invading countries are going to bomb them off the face of the earth. And I don't know if somebody moved away from me next door so other people could come in and kill me, if I'd be welcoming them back into their house either. So again, we need to understand history and not listen to this nonsense that's being peddled out there in the international community. Now, another interesting development as it relates to Bible prophecy, the Times of Israel is reporting that Israel is ready to sell the Iron Dome to the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, and build regional defenses against Iran. And here comes into play that old saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And there's a shared animosity between the Israelis and the Sunni Arab Gulf states against the Shiite Iranians and their aggressive tactics. And this enemy of my enemy is my friend type of mentality is what this is all about, at least at the heart of it. And the report says that Israel may sell warning and interception equipment to Abu Dhabi amid mounting attacks from Tehran-backed separatists. In the wake of a missile attack launched during President Isaac Herzog's landmark visit to Abu Dhabi, apparently by Iranian-backed Houthis, Israel is reportedly planning the advanced sale of missile defense systems to the UAE. Channel 13 News reported Monday that talks were underway for the sale of a number of weapon systems to the UAE, which would both warn of incoming fire and intercept it. Abu Dhabi is currently operating a South Korean missile defense system. The report said the sale of the Iron Dome missile defense system to the UAE would mark the beginnings of a regional defense system that would help give Israel advance warning of any potential attack by Tehran. However, according to Channel 12 News, a decision has not yet been made by Israel whether the Iron Dome system will be sold to the UAE or to Saudi Arabia. Now, that's important. Israel has denied previous reports that it has already provided Riyadh with a defense system. Now, we have to remember that in the Ezekiel war scenario, we've got named invading nations there under ancient names found in the Table of Nations back in Genesis chapter 10. And we also have protesting geographic areas marked out there under ancient names as well, specifically Sheba and Dedan. And this is the Arab Gulf area. This is Saudi Arabia, and the Arab Gulf states are going to be the nations that are protesting against the invasion of Russia, Turkey, Iran, Libya, and Sudan from the north into the nation of Israel. And they're going to protest the invasion by asking, what is the purpose? Have you come to take booty and plunder? Or in other words, is this for economic reasons? And we certainly see a lot of that happening today with the posturing and positioning regarding who's going to be able to access the European energy markets. So interesting to see this type of relationship developing just in these recent years when, of course, we have to remember Saudi Arabia is where Islam was founded. And now here we are thousands of years later as far as it relates to Israel, and some 1,500 years later as it relates to Islam, almost 15, I should say. And here you've got the Bible coming alive and leaping off the page. That tells us that the Ezekiel war scenario, if the invading forces are on the northern border of Israel for the most part, and they are in coalition, the three who have a physical presence, Turkey, Iran, and Russia, on the northern border of Israel, all have relationships with Sudan and Libya, specifically Libya trying to resolve this civil war conflict that's been going on there. And Turkey's been playing a major role there. And interesting to see them all operating in coalition together. And then now you've got both the UAE and Saudi Arabia, which makes up the territorial region known as Sheba and Dedan in the Ezekiel 38-39 war scenario, now considering purchase from Israel a system that will help them defend themselves in the way Israel has been able to do so for themselves. Ynet News is reporting Israel's latest Syria adventure is a message to Putin. Despite Damascus airing to Moscow its frustration with repeated Israeli-linked attacks on its soil, Jerusalem signals it won't pull any punches to stop Iran's entrenchment along its northern border. On Monday, two major Iran-related security incidents took place in a span of 3 hours. First, there was an airstrike on the outskirts of Damascus attributed to Israel, targeting warehouses belonging to the Iranian-backed Hezbollah group. The other was a ballistic missile fired at Abu Dhabi by Iranian-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen during President Isaac Herzog's visit, as we talked about a moment ago. Although the missile was launched by the Houthi fighters, it was clearly an Iranian assault on the Gulf nation and could serve to further strengthen Israeli-Emirati security cooperation. The pre-dawn strike on Damascus came just over a week after a joint flyby of the Russian and Syrian air forces along Israel's Golan Heights border, which some believe signals the Kremlin's dissatisfaction with increasing Israeli attacks against its northeastern neighbor. Now, Damascus came up a couple of times in that article, and we need to remember there's I call it a standalone prophecy there in Isaiah 17:1, of Damascus becoming a ruinous heap. And listen, no, that didn't happen in the past under Sennacherib in the 7th century BC. That was not the fulfillment of Isaiah 17:1. And the reason we know that is because there's still a Damascus. And Damascus will become an uninhabitable city. It will be completely ruined permanently, and no one will ever live there again. And just simply the fact that not only is there a Damascus today, it's the capital of Syria. So it has not been fulfilled. It's yet to be fulfilled. And some believe that this is going to be the catalyst or the fuse, so to speak, that ignites the invasion from the north of the Ezekiel invaders. Damascus will be destroyed. These nations that are positioning themselves better, especially the Iranians, for a strike point from Israel close to their border, are going to then signal the launch of the invasion from the north, which, by the way, God is going to respond to, and he is going to destroy. And again, just for your information, you won't find in the modern translations 5/6 of the army being destroyed, but you will find that in the King Jimmy, and that 5/6 of the invading forces will lie dead on the mountains in Israel. So it's going to be a massive victory on the part of God. He's going to fight against them with earthquake and hailstones of fire mingled with blood. So very clearly a divine response as to who has a right to the land, especially in the midst of this upcoming invasion. Now, here's where all this is going, and I think this is fascinating to see these kind of stories developing. And this, again, comes from Israel 365. And the headline reads, Israeli police who used to arrest Jews for praying on the Temple Mount are now joining them. A photo was posted on the Facebook page of Biyadenu, an organization that advocates for Jewish rights on the Temple Mount that just a few years ago would have been impossible. The photo showed a quorum of Jewish men praying on the Temple Mount. In itself, it is wonderful that Jews are praying at their holiest site, and prayer in a minyan, a quorum of 10, is considered to be a much higher spiritual level, allowing certain prayers that a solitary worshiper does not recite. A group of men will even delay praying in order to search for other men to complete the quorum. This is unfortunately not possible for an incomplete minyan on the Temple Mount, as the entrance for Jews is tightly controlled and limited to small groups. So when a group of 9 men wanted to pray on Sunday morning, they had no choice but to turn to the Israeli policeman guarding them and ask if he would be willing to join them in prayer. The policeman agreed, and the prayers commenced. Equal rights for Jews to pray on the Temple Mount is, in fact, protected by Israeli law, but the police have decided that security concerns require non-compliance with the law. The Waqf, the Muslim trust that was appointed by Jordan to play a custodial role at Judaism's holiest site, insists on a Muslim monopoly, inciting Palestinian violence in response to religious equality. Nonetheless, the situation is improving on the Temple Mount as more Jews ascend. Jews have recently been permitted to pray at the site with the tacit assent of the police. The Post noted that Jewish prayer must still regrettably be said in a low voice. And the picture that was posted on social media had a large red arrow pointing to the policeman who joined the prayer group with the caption, "Be this cop." Now, this is interesting and why I thought it important to tie all these things together, because just as we see and mentioned a moment ago that it's possible that the launch of the Ezekiel war scenario is catalyzed by the destruction of Damascus, and that being, again, a response to the Iranian presence there on Israel's northern border and the allowance of the Syrian government for that to happen. One thing we do know that draws the ire of the Arab communities and much of the Muslim world is the issue over the Temple Mount. And the fact that the Israeli police, even if it's just one, that's a pretty significant move in light of what the article said, which was true, has been true ever since 1967 when the Jews took possession of what is rightfully theirs. And by the way, let me just remind you that Jerusalem is not mentioned in the Quran anywhere. And the Temple Mount is not a holy site in Islam. And again, Islamic scholars have said, the faraway mosque that many try and say is the Temple Mount is not in Israel. It's actually in Saudi Arabia with Mecca and Medina. So there's no implied mention, even as some try and make it sound like this is the faraway mosque of the Quran. That's actually the Temple Mount. No, there's no mention of Jerusalem. There's no mention of this particular place and the things that have been associated with the Temple Mount. Muhammad's ascension into heaven were created long after the Quran and was written and the institution of Islam. So there's just absolutely zero significance to the Muslims of the Temple Mount, other than the fact that they recognize, I believe, that it's where Ishmael, rather than Isaac, was offered by Abraham, and the Dome of the Rock Mosque is where they believe the story that the Bible records, where Abraham was directed by God to take his only son and offer him to the Lord. And of course, the Lord had other plans. He had provided a ram for himself for that necessary sacrifice. But again, this is a Jewish holy site. It is exclusively a Jewish holy site, and the ones who do not have a right there aren't the Jews, but rather the Muslims, who have now built a mosque there and a shrine as well. Now, here's an interesting story, I think, and I just want to mention this because, one, we've been talking about the fact that there'll be an instability within high places of government, and just basically a divided house that has significant ramifications upon a country's decision-making processes, and of course its inner stability. And interesting that we've got a group who's called the Squad, a group of anti-Israeli women who come from anti-Israeli countries who were fortunate enough to find a home here and basically have turned on the United States and Israel, and yet they occupy places of power in our own government. And Alpha News is reporting that Ilan Omar was paid thousands by a restaurant accused of stealing money intended to feed starving children. Representative Ilan Omar and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Fry are accused of receiving donations from men who stole millions of COVID relief dollars. One of these men also runs a charity founded by a city council member and sits on a city working group. Representative Omar has partied at and received donations from a business accused by the FBI of stealing millions of COVID relief dollars intended for children. Feeding Our Future received $197.9 million in 2021 to provide food to starving Minnesota children impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. However, the FBI recently raided the nonprofit's headquarters and suggested that little or none of this money was actually spent feeding kids. Instead, the agency, the FBI that is, believes the nonprofit conspired with local businesses to falsify records and funnel the money into private accounts. The Pioneer Press has observed that the businesses involved in this scandal tend to be led by members of the East African diaspora. One of these establishments is Safari Restaurant, a Somali eatery located in Minneapolis Powderhorn Park neighborhood. Safari has been a focal point of Representative Ilhan Omar's engagement with her constituents for years. She appeared there numerous times and even hosted her 2018 victory party at the restaurant, the owners of which are now accused of stealing millions. Specifically, Safari was reimbursed for $15 million it allegedly spent serving meals to hungry children between May and November of 2020. The restaurant claims it fed 5,000 children a day, more than the St. Paul public school system, interestingly. The FBI casts serious doubt on this and highlights in a search warrant that Safari-affiliated shell companies purchased items like an $87,000 pickup truck, a $1 million home in Plymouth, a $2.8 million mansion in Minneapolis after the alleged fraud took place. And the restaurant has also donated thousands to Omar's campaign since the fraud reportedly transpired. So again, corruption at the high level of government, and watching all this unfold because of an ideology that is, basically in opposition to the Judeo-Christian values that this country was established on and has been blessed because of, are now being infiltrated, and just so many things are going on that just remind us it's time to be looking up. Our redemption is nigh. All of these things, and again, according to Isaiah chapter 3, where we're told that at the time where the Lord judges and his wrath is poured out on the earth, that basically incompetent and incapable leaders will be playing their part during that time. The phrases that are actually used is children will be their princes. Now, Assist News is reporting, we're going to switch gears a little bit here, Beijing's Christians expected to behave and lay low during the Winter Olympics. As the Winter Olympics are launched this week, church leaders in Beijing say they are preparing to keep a low profile to avoid coming into conflict with Chinese authorities, according to the Christian persecution charity Open Doors. We know that we should not be active during this kind of event, said Pastor Wang from Beijing. We know how we should behave during this time, and that is to lay low. According to Zhang Wei, a local contact for Open Doors, at times of major events like this, ministers are warned to behave, be quiet, and remain invisible in the public domain. If the churches do not comply, their church meetings run the risk of being stopped. By now, Beijing's churches know what to do, he said. During celebrations for the National Day of the People's Republic of China last year, there were reports of authorities making regular calls to house church pastors to reiterate their boundaries. They were basically expected to lay low and do very little, says Zhang Wei. Meeting in smaller groups is tolerated, but larger church events are frowned upon. Pastors who are suspected of conducting church activities other than low-profile regular Sunday services can be forced to have what are known as tea meetings with local party officials. For ordinary believers, the consequences may just be warnings or registration of their ID, says Zhang Wei, but for leaders and pastors, they can be interrogated for hours, detained overnight, and fined. And there can be more severe consequences if the churches resist the authorities and cause a disturbance. If ever the pastor or church leader is found out that he pushed through with conducting church services, he can receive an administrative detention for a few days up to 2 weeks. So again, interesting that we see the United States of America that is founded on the freedom of the free exercise of religion turn a blind eye to the persecution, not only of the Uyghurs, the Muslims who are in China, to the tune of some million of them that are in concentration camp type settings, and as well as the limitation of the church and its practices there, all because of cheaper goods available from China. So again, we've just got poor leadership at the helm in so many countries today, where basically the dollar is king and God, and it's bowed to in order to conduct business with people who are abusing its citizens. Now, the Times of Israel says Amnesty International reports that Israel practiced apartheid against the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. The rights group says Palestinians treated as inferior racial group does not compare to Israel to South Africa, but evaluates policies based on international conventions and urges bans on arms sales to Israel. Amnesty International said Tuesday that Israel has maintained a system of oppression and domination over the Palestinians going all the way back to its establishment in 1948, one that meets international definition of apartheid. The accusation was leveled against Israel both within its borders and in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. In a report unveiled in Jerusalem, the group did not directly compare Israel to apartheid South Africa, but it said it was evaluating Israel's policies based on international conventions, as we read a moment ago. Ahead of the report's release, Israel called it false, biased, and anti-Semitic, and accused the organization of endangering the safety of Jews around the world. The rights group released the document despite calls from Israel not to do so. And get this, Amnesty International said there is no double standard in accusing Israel, but not China, of apartheid. As I mentioned a moment ago, there are 1 million Uyghurs, Muslim people who live in China, who are being imprisoned, 1 million of them being imprisoned. And we just read an article about the limitations and threats placed upon the church there. And yet Amnesty International has the gall to say that there's no comparison between, or no double standard between accusing Israel, where, by the way, Arabs live in complete freedom, can have their jobs, own businesses, own their own homes, and all of these things. But China is not doing the same thing. So that they're accusing Israel of, just absolutely unbelievable. And again, they use this Palestinian area, as their flagship, so to speak, which was established, basically by those who wanted to see the demise of Israel and the destruction of the state. And in Palestinian textbooks, there is no Israel in their maps, in their geography classes. They want to see them absolutely destroyed. And yet here we've got a group like Amnesty International, ignorant of the facts and promoting lies and things that just simply are historically ridiculous. Christian Headline says, school suspends a Christian student after he calls homosexuality a sin. A Michigan high school student who was allegedly suspended for calling homosexuality a sin and for failing to report his classmates' inappropriate jokes filed a federal lawsuit last week, claiming the school's actions violated his constitutional rights. David Stout, a junior at Plainwell High School in Plainwell, Michigan, was suspended for 3 days last fall for allegedly violating the school's cyberbullying harassment policy. Stout, though, he says he was only humbly stating his Christian beliefs and that the conversation was private. Stout is a member of the football team and the band. The Great Lakes Justice Center is representing the family, and my client's religious speech and beliefs should be treated with tolerance and respect, said David A. Kalman, a senior legal counsel with Great Lakes Justice Center. Public schools may not violate the Constitution and enforce a heckler's veto of student speech. Nothing David did caused any disruption or problem at the school. He has the right to express his opinion in accordance with his sincerely held religious beliefs without vilification or punishment from the government for holding to those beliefs. And the controversy began in April of 2021 when Stout was involved in an off-campus text conversation with a friend who asked him his thoughts about a classmate being gay. Stout stated that the Bible teaches that homosexual conduct is a sin, and in the Christian context that God created two biological genders, man and woman. The plaintiff stated that while homosexual conduct is a sin, however, everyone is a sinner due to our free will choices, and he would pray for them to repent and follow Jesus. And yet here he winds up in court for quoting scripture. I hope you can all see really what the true agenda is behind this. It is to silence the church. It is to basically attack the Word of God, deny the Word of God as being valid and true. And, interesting, my wife and I were talking just this morning that, it seems like that all the violations of scriptural things have backed all the way up to Genesis 1. There's really nothing left for man to violate. And therefore, again, I think we need to recognize that the glorious appearing of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ, is at hand, even at the door. Now, because the Bible tells us in the Gospel of Luke that there will be frightening signs in the heavens, I want to keep you abreast of what's going on out there in the cosmos. And this is an interesting story from, again, a website called Gizmodo. And the headline reads, NASA's asteroid detector was upgraded to scan the entire sky every day. NASA's Atlas, a planetary defense system that scans the sky for near-Earth objects, has been upgraded to search the entire night sky, half of it in either hemisphere, once every 24 hours. The surveillance system is vital for tracking objects like asteroids and debris that are on a collision course with Earth. Now, let me pause here for a moment. Now, why would they do that all of a sudden? They've had the capability to do that since the system was put in place, but all of a sudden they're wanting to scan the sky all the time. Well, the reason is the stories we've been reporting of late, where these batches just a few weeks ago, there were 10 asteroids that all of a sudden passed between the sun or the Earth and the moon. And we've had these just 2 weeks ago, or a week and a half ago, actually, we had this twice the size of the Empire State Building asteroid, which was dubbed an asteroid of concern by NASA, passed by, and it was visible through just basically binoculars or a backyard telescope. That's how close it was. So it seems like they're all of a sudden upping their game a bit and are a bit concerned about these rogue planetary or solar system visitors, and even within our own area of the moon and the Earth, as it just seems like these stories are increasing, and they keep coming every single week about something that was just discovered passing by the Earth. ATLAS stands for Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System and is operated by the University of Hawaii's Institute for Astronomy. And the system is made up of 4 telescopes, 2 in Hawaii and 1 in South Africa and 1 in Chile. And the latter 2 recently added to the system to survey the southern hemisphere. And all telescopes in the ATLAS system can image a region of the sky 100 times larger than the full moon in a single exposure. And it's an important part of planetary defense in finding asteroids before they find us. So if necessary, we can get them before they get us, according to Kelly Fast, a Near-Earth Object Observation Program Manager for NASA's Planetary Defense Coordination Office in an agency release. With the addition of these 2 telescopes, she went on to say, ATLAS is now capable of searching the entire night sky every 24 hours, making it an important asset for NASA's continuous effort to find, track, and monitor NEOs, or near-Earth objects. Not all dangerous near-Earth objects are asteroids, they said. Last year, China let a rocket make an uncontrolled re-entry into the planet. It eventually fell into the Pacific Ocean, but natural debris is a more common concern. Since its inception, the system has discovered, get this, 700 near-Earth asteroids, 72 of which were considered potentially hazardous, as well as 66 comets. 2 asteroids spotted by ATLAS eventually did impact the Earth. So again, we know there'll be signs in the heavens, frightening signs in the heavens. We also know, and I've said this before, I'll repeat it again, that I believe there is an asteroid strike and a comet strike during the tribulation. And while, again, we cannot say that any of these recent things are directly related to Bible prophecy, other than the fact they are reminders that there's going to be these events, these catastrophic cosmological events during the tribulation period. And I think that the Lord is wanting us all to remember that gives us an idea of our proximity to the coming of the Lord to snatch the church off the surface of the earth. Now, again, we know that there's going to be geological activity on the earth, as Jesus said. The earthquakes and the other things associated with geological activity, including volcanoes, is going to be increasing in the last days, as well as atmospheric events. And KOIN, or Coin TV out of Portland, says that geologists are closely monitoring rising magma under the Three Sisters volcanic region. The Pacific Northwest is well known for its stunning summits and plentiful peaks, but are the mountains moving? In a USGS hazard notification statement issued just Monday, Cascades Volcano Observatory announced their scientists have tracked an increased rate of ground uplift in the Three Sisters volcanic region. South Pacific eruption recorded at Cascade seismic stations, according to the USGS, using satellite radar and GPS units. They have increased an uplift for a 12-mile diameter region, 3 miles west of South Sister volcano, according to the USGS. The data suggests the ground rose 0.9 inches or 2.2 centimeters from June 2020 to August 2021. And Scott Burns, a geology professor at Portland State University, told KOIN 6 News, while episodes of the increased uplift have been observed in this region before, the cause is what local scientists are excited about. The Three Sisters area is an area that we've been studying for the last 25 years, Burns explained. It's very exciting because magma is moving up underneath the volcano. The last major volcanic eruption in Oregon, which was 2,000 years ago, was right there in that area. And the Washington senator says that the Pacific Northwest needs better volcano monitoring. While the catalyst for the current uplift is unconfirmed, geologists have been able to credit previous soil shifts at the South Sister location to small pushes of magma accumulating approximately 4 miles below the Earth's surface. Now, this is important because there's a relationship between volcanoes and earthquake activity, and the Cascadia Fault is the most cataclysmic fault, potentially cataclysmic fault in the United States. It runs directly through Seattle. And geologists have long said, we get a lot of press about the fault that runs here down through almost the length of California. And the big one that's often talked about happening there on that fault. But the Cascadia Fault is one of great and major concern, and partially because of the number of volcanoes up in that region, including the supervolcano at Yellowstone. Now, there is a supervolcano in California as well, and interesting that it has a mouth or a caldera that is some 20 miles wide, and that volcano is in the Mammoth Mountain area. And so interesting to see these things happening and seeing these kinds of activities. And, there's excitement around it, but again, we have to remember there's going to be these major geological events that take place during the tribulation period. And, it's not just the San Andreas Fault that we need to keep an eye on, but the Cascadia Fault as well is showing some activity. Now, here's an interesting story I think that we all can relate to and wonder about. And this actually got me thinking a little bit about just how we're watching an agenda play out of the globalist, and including, some who are concerned about those who are kind of have sanctioned and promoted population control and the other things and all the things associated with what we've recently been going through. But The Hill has an article that said, or was headlined with the statement, "Coming soon, climate lockdowns, ? The past 2 years have been a checklist for the worst impulses of government and public sentiment. COVID allowed for supposedly temporary measures to morph into 2 years of emergency restrictions. But what if COVID is only the opening act? And another proclaimed crisis is the main event, implementing significant but partial restrictions one by one in the name of the common good can allow for encompassing government control that results in relatively little backlash. Fear over climate change could lead to a long-term soft lockdown, given the precedent of immense growth of governmental power and significant support for sweeping state actions. This isn't a right-wing fever dream. Calls for harsh government measures in the name of saving the environment are already in the parlance of influential organizations and figures. In November 2020, the Red Cross proclaimed that climate change is a bigger threat than COVID and should be confronted with the same urgency. Bill Gates recently demanded dramatic measures to prevent climate change, claiming it will be worse than the pandemic, despite millions of people having died from COVID. The former governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, last year predicted that climate deaths will dwarf those of the pandemic. Lockdowns, which significantly reduced carbon emissions during 2020, could be the solution. After all, the EU's climate service gloated the first COVID lockdown may have saved 800 lives because people weren't driving their cars and things of that nature. The article poses the question, what would climate lockdowns look like? Most likely, cities and states would begin a gradual and discreet ramp up of restrictions. During the early days of the pandemic, millions of Americans work from home. This could become the permanent norm if special carbon taxes are put in place. Such taxes could be imposed on companies, limiting driving or air miles, and extend to individual employees. Drive to work in a car, you get hit with a tax. Children could be impacted by climate lockdowns too. Schools, especially those heavily influenced by teachers' unions, could impose permanent online-only days. And Delhi, India, is already using a version of this concept to crack down on smog pollution. So, again, George Orwell, 1984, government control, buying and selling only if you have a mark. All these things are leading up, are being used to lead up to what we know is going to happen to the earth and people bowing to the government, the single leader, single world ruler during the tribulation period. Now, here's an interesting story, and I think one of the saddest things that has happened out of this COVID situation that we've all been going through now for over 2 years is that those who should be the most trusted are now, to a degree, the least trusted, and that is those who have the responsibility to care for human lives and took a Hippocratic oath to do so. Johns Hopkins University study says ill-founded lockdowns did little to promote COVID deaths. Researchers say lockdowns had no noticeable effect on COVID mortality and had a devastating effect on economies and social ills. Researchers at Johns Hopkins University have concluded that lockdowns have done little to reduce COVID deaths, but have had devastating effects on economies and numerous social ills. In a study titled A Literature Review and Meta-Analysis of the Effects of Lockdowns on COVID-19 Mortality said, lockdowns in Europe and the U.S. reduced COVID-19 deaths by 2%. 2%. Shelter-in-place orders were also ineffective, reducing COVID mortality by 2.9%. We find no evidence that lockdown, school closures, border closures, and limiting gatherings have had a noticeable effect on COVID-19 mortality, the researchers wrote in their report. Again, this is Johns Hopkins University, one of the most respected medical universities in the world. The study concluded that lockdowns are ill-founded and should be rejected as a pandemic policy instrument. They have contributed to reducing economic activity, raising unemployment, reducing schooling, causing political unrest, contributing to domestic violence, and undermining liberal democracy, the report said. The study was written by Jonas Herby, Lars Janum, and Stephen H. Henke of the Johns Hopkins Institute for Applied Economies, Global Health, and the Study of Business Enterprise. European countries are going to be continuing to scrap restrictions as countries no longer consider the outbreak a socially critical disease. And bit by bit, many countries that have been especially hard hit by the coronavirus are easing their tough and often unpopular restrictive measures to fight COVID-19, even as the Omicron variant, deemed less severe, has caused cases to skyrocket. So, interesting to see here this respected university comes out and says everything you've been doing has done little to help. As a matter of fact, it's caused more harm than it has done good. Remember, we've been talking about the fact over the past few weeks that the number one killer of those in the United States of America, of people between 18 and 45, was fentanyl overdoses. People, I believe, to a degree, trying to escape what's going on, at least for a moment, and wind up losing their life. And the second leading killer in the United States in the last year was suicide. And again, same type of motivation, people trying to escape the pains and pressures of life, to say nothing of the economic impacts. We took a walk around our local mall last week, and it was sad to see a place that used to thrive with people conducting their business, supporting small businesses, which, by the way, is the backbone of America, not large corporations. Small businesses are the backbone of America. And to see so many of them, these individual shops where somebody had their hopes and dreams dashed because people couldn't go to the mall. And places like that were shut down. Can't even count the number of restaurants we've seen go out of business where someone, again, their family, maybe for generations, has operated a single unit, small family restaurant, but it's kept their families fed and supplied with the things that they need to live and enjoy life. And this was destroyed by these lockdowns. So, we have to pay attention to these things. And of course, the loss of human life is tragic. And we're not downplaying those things whatsoever. But I think we have to take heed to what Johns Hopkins is reporting, is that, as we all know, I do believe these things aren't working. If they were working, we'd be out of this already. And you wouldn't have to take booster after booster after booster every 5 months to beat this thing. So again, we're just living in crazy and wild and perilous times, but that's exactly what the Bible said was going to take place. We're watching the players of the Ezekiel invasion form. We're watching the protesters of the Ezekiel invasion normalize relations with Israel. We're seeing the lovers of self and all the things that 2 Timothy 3:1-5 reports the last days are going to be like. We're hearing about frightening events in the heavens, potentially frightening events in the heavens. The ground is moving, as Jesus said. There's major concerns about a drought, a famine-causing drought in Africa, the whole Horn of Africa that is brewing right now, and the famine and disease and all the other things that are going to, according to Jesus in Matthew 24:3-8, increase in a birth pang-like progression, increasing in frequency and intensity, are happening all around us. Now you add to that the world is hungry for a single ruler and is tired of all the nonsense of these who have a double standard, who demand everybody in their city or country wear a mask, and then pictures pop up on the media of them being in the very things they've restricted others from doing without a mask themselves, being served by people who are wearing masks. And people are just tired of this and sick of it all over the world as we see these protests breaking out. So the world is primed and ready for one guy to rise up and say, I've got some answers here. Going to solve the Middle East crisis, going to help the Jews rebuild their temple on the Temple Mount. All these things that the Antichrist is going to do. And we're going to make sure that we're monitoring all global commerce. And if you're an enemy of progress and of the state, so to speak, we're simply going to eliminate you, and you've got to take a mark on your hand or forehead. And the world is marching rapidly in that direction. So a great time, amazing time to be alive. And hey, just a heads up for any of you who are out there in the Cincinnati area, we're having a conference. Amir, myself, and Pastor Michael Lay will be speaking in Loveland, Ohio, at a conference that you'll be able to catch online. The event is fully registered or sold out, so to speak. And if you happen to be in the area and you'd like to join us at Calvary Chapel, Cincinnati, I will be speaking at Calvary Chapel, Cincinnati on February 20th of this year, rather. So would love to meet some of you there. So anyway, that's it for today. Hope you were encouraged and enlightened and reminded again that we live in times that the Bible has long spoke of, and they are described as the last days, and that means Jesus is coming soon. So one way or the other, we will see you here, there, or in the air.